with. And then Pastor also kind of mentioned that there's Christians out there that they say that, hey, this is what I believe, and that is really what they believe, but then maybe there's a difference in what they should believe and what they actually do believe. And you'll hear me mention that a couple times, like that you can have two things that you don't think should be true, but they very much are. So today I am going to continue to expand upon what I spoke about in September on the topic of compassion for each other and humanity, in particular people that you might find it very difficult to have compassion for. And what it really means to have compassion for all of God's creations, and the potential consequences if we fail to strive for that particular goal, not only for ourselves, but for the church as a whole. And you'll hear me mention that term, the church, the greater church, a number of times. And just to be clear, when I say that, I'm not talking about second chance ministries. I'm talking about just the greater church, specifically in America, because I don't know that much about the challenges that Christians are dealing with in Europe or England or South America or Central America or anything like that. So it's, my knowledge base is here. And, on the topic of the church in America, for years, if not decades, there's been much discussion and discourse on the decline of Christianity in the Western world. Decline as in like lower church attendance declining, church membership declining, influence declining, and even kind of recently the number of people even saying that they even believe in God starting to slow. For a while that kind of held tight, even though membership dipped down, but even that starting to decline recently in a way that wasn't in the past. And of course there's many reasons offered as to why there's this decline, that content creators in the Christian Christian content leaders on the internet, leaders of churches, lots of reasons offered as to why this has been happening. Declining cultural values around us is one reason that's offered up. A lot of those who have a voice will say, oh, well, a lot of people leaving their faith was just weak to begin with. And of course, the entertainment industry is another oldie but goodie. It's, the music, the TV, the movies, all that stuff, their social media. But what I don't often hear is to what extent any of this decline in commitment of faith falls on the shoulders of the church itself. And I do believe the greater church body needs to take a hard look at itself and find ways in which it can hold itself accountable. As a high school teacher and an esports coach, I talk a lot about holding oneself accountable, and I do so by speaking about variables. There are variables that you can control, and there's variables that you cannot. One of the hardest things for my students and people in general to accept is that the one variable you most want to control is usually the variable you have the least power over, and that's the actions of others. You can't make someone be more honest with you. You can't make someone be more motivated to help or receive help. You can't make someone understand what you're going through, what you're feeling. You can't make someone start treating you with the respect and dignity that you deserve. You can try, and those are battles that are worth fighting, I think, in a lot of ways, but they are very long-term multi-generational engagements. As for the here and now, there's generally only one variable that you have a very high degree control over, and that is your own actions. A lot of religious and conservative leaders love to talk about the virtues of being held accountable for your own actions, as long as it isn't them or the church that's having to do so. And in the meantime, something very serious that seems to be mysterious is affecting the faith people have in the church. And until we take a hard look at our own role in that decline, then we're just going to sit on the sidelines and just watch it continue to happen, saying, well, it's not our fault, it's just all them. Now an in-depth analysis that goes into all of why we see our fewer people going to church is far beyond the scope of this talk, and frankly, anything, in fact, with my own knowledge and experience. There's so many reasons as to why that's happening, and I don't think this is just one thing that I'm talking about. It's just the one thing that I feel like I know a little bit about and I feel most passionate about. But the idea of focusing on the variables and the variables we can control is absolutely the key point in what I spoke on a couple months ago and will continue to speak about today. Because I think too many Christians today are falling prey to secular forces that are distracting us, baiting us, controlling our focus so that we focus on relatively minor injuries, so we don't see the big picture and the greater harm being done, which might be a perpetually nagging source of doubt for millions. Last time I spoke about the degree to which we label each other and how that is an act of aggression that's harming people, that's harming someone, even if you're in your own mind. Labeling people puts people in a box in our minds from which neither they nor we can escape. We cease to see them as dynamic and complex human beings, capable of both great highs and terrible lows, but rather it puts them as, no, all that you are is this one thing. And this is very un-Christ-like behavior. When you define someone as a single thing that encompasses all of who they are and denies anything else that might also be true about them, you might just be judging them based on their worst act, their worst day, their worst sin. How many of us do you think would make it into heaven if we were to be judged only by our worst act, our worst day, our worst sin? The answer is nobody. And that's exactly what Jesus came to save us from. Jesus sees who we are as creations of God in all of our entirety and our actual faith and humanity. And that is the model for which we should strive when we interact with anybody in our lives. But how to do this? And I acknowledge that this is not easy. Some people's worst sins, worst acts, worst days are much easier to grapple with than others. Showing people grace and compassion when they accidentally step on your new shoes is one thing. But what about someone who says Christians are hypocrites? Yeah. Christians are bigots. It's easy to immediately think to ourselves, oh, here we go. It's one of those people. We immediately put them in a box. We've immediately labeled them. And then immediately, whether we realize it or not, we're going into fight or flight mode, right? We're going, here's an enemy, and they're trying to attack us. So I'm either going to engage and try to win the argument, or I'll just back off and not even deal with them. Now, maybe they are an enemy. That is possible. But maybe they're not. And I'm asking, what if we were to respond to those criticisms with, I know exactly what you mean. Christians are hypocrites? I might say, you know what? Yeah, there's a lot. Yep. I'll name some famous ones. Joel Osteen, Kenneth Copeland, Jerry Falwell. And I'm sure you guys can think of ones too, right? I'm picking big names, right? Because you're talking about a random stranger. It's a good chance could have been one of those ones that's affecting their opinion right now. Mm-hmm. So fair enough. It's a fair accusation given how many people see these great and terrible figures. You can acknowledge the degree to which corruption has affected Christianity in this country, while also still testifying to the powerful ways in which God has touched your lives and your community. By acknowledging the way that this person who is saying this has likely been hurt or offended in some way by other Christians, you can show them that you, this Christian right here, you can engage with me. You are someone who might listen to them, and therefore might also be someone that they can listen to. Not because they're going to walk away changed by the encounter. This is never about winning the argument, which I'm going to get to in a little later, because that's just not something that's really possible for almost any situation. But just ensuring that hey, at least it's not your actions that cause someone to turn themselves off to hearing about Jesus, and making sure that your actions at least make sure that they remain open to at least receiving a seed that might grow later. Christians are bigots. I would say, yeah, there's a lot of it, and there's a long history of it too.
Amen.
I would say to them that unfortunately, many have long infiltrated our Christian institutions in this country. And it makes me sad to see the harm that they've done in the past and continue to do today. It's one thing to say, I don't approve of someone's lifestyle. It's another thing to actively support laws that say we don't serve fill in the blank people here, which many Christians still do today. It's not just something that used to happen in the South. Again, be someone who might listen to them, and therefore might be someone that they would be willing to listen to. People who are angry with us for something someone else did, well, those are people that are in pain. And it might just be the case that we might share a common source for that pain. We've taken a different reaction to it. We've taken a different path with that source of frustration and pain. But that is something we have in common, and maybe we can talk to each other about. If we can find that commonality, from there, we can build a relationship. And the only people you will ever have any chance of changing are the ones that you have a relationship with. Because if our goal is to really change hearts and minds, to be the Christians Jesus wants us to be, we have to be willing to face people who want to label us and engage with them as a fellow human being and not a combatant in an arena. I've known a number of Christians of the last few years, and that's how they feel, like they're soldiers gearing up for an army. And there's nothing wrong with that idea of being a soldier in the army, but the way it's being used is not about like against the enemy, it's about against each other. Yes, I mean, that seems to be the implication. I don't think that's what some of the songs we sing in this church are trying to get us to do. Our sinful nature makes us want to assume people of these other groups act a certain way or believe certain things without actually putting in the time and effort to check if those assumptions are true, and then are shocked when they don't want to hear from us. Shocked when they start labeling us certain kinds of things. Philippians 2:3-4 says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interest, but the interests of others. In this case, our self-interest is convenience. It is just simply easier to slap a label on someone as fast as possible so that it's easier for our brains to make sense of something or someone and then move about our day. That's what we want to do. That's what our nature is. It's quicker and easier to destroy someone in our minds than it is to open our minds and learn what more there may be to this person in front of you, this creation of God standing right before us, calling us what they call us. In fact, I am making the argument that if we can't or won't show people love, compassion, and grace when you speak to them, then they should not listen to a single thing you have to say. Not about Jesus or anything else, even if you're speaking truth. If we deny their humanity, we cannot ask them to respect ours in return. We cannot expect them to understand what God wants us to be. Just think about it. If you know someone who shows you a lack of respect because of the clothes you wear, the church you go to, your skin color, whatever, are you going to listen to them when they try to tell you about the message of Jesus? No. Even if what they have to say about Jesus is true, you're not going to trust it. There are people who 100% believe that they are following Jesus, attend church, attend Bible study, engage with the community. They're all in 7 days a week. And also believe some humans are inferior to others in our society. These two things can be true about someone at the same time. But if both of these two things are true, It's real hard for most people to get past that first part because it's just so hard to trust someone who looks down on you. And again, if they really do look down on you, then you shouldn't listen to them because they're acting out of self-interest and not your interest. If we want others to hear us out, that when we try to explain the truth, then we need to not create those same barriers. We need to not give them a reason to doubt us as representatives of the church. And that's not fair that you as an individual have to be a representative of the whole great church, but welcome to humanity. And again, we aren't changing people in the moment when we engage with them as humans. Romans 12:12-15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Finding that shared human experience of joy and pain, happiness and frustration, we are just planting seeds when we build those relationships with others. The best way to do that is to show them who you really are, to engage with them, hear them out, ask questions, seek out the source of their frustrations. That's how you find their humanity and get past the labeling that your mind wants you to do. Think of those who came into conflict with Jesus in the Bible. Not many times did they change their mind after Jesus, owned them or shut down their arguments. In fact, many of them got angry and started conspiring against him. But Jesus never characterized them as an enemy. Humans have done that, labeling Jews as the enemy and all that, but Jesus never called them an enemy. Jesus never really talked bad about them individuals. He just focused on the act or the thought or the idea before him, and then ended up weeping and dying for them all the same. And you don't have to let a lack of knowledge and facts and citations and whatnot hold you back. You don't have to feel like you're well-versed, because your main goal is not to shut them down or prove them wrong anyways, because in so many cases, it's impossible. In his book on the history of racism in this country, Stamped from the Beginning, Ibram X. Kendi makes an argument that you can't fight racist ideas, bigoted ideas with rationality, because those ideas do not come from a place of rationality. Mm-hmm. Slavery didn't come around because someone hated or feared Black people in Africa. It came around because a few wealthy people saw an opportunity to exploit people for money and came up with racist ideas later to justify those actions. When banks intentionally targeted communities of color in the 2000s with predatory loans, it wasn't because they hated or feared Black and brown people. It happened because a few wealthy people saw an opportunity to exploit other people for money and then supported racist and classist ideas later on to hide their own accountability for the crisis they ended up creating in 2008. The main message being, it's not about the offensive ideas that come at us about as Christians that are the problem. They're hurtful and they're uncomfortable. That's not really the problem, the things that people say about us. The problem is the institutions that support those ideas. If we don't take a closer look at those institutions that are inspiring those ideas, we're going to forever be fighting a losing battle against those ideas. And the same is true for the Christian church. What are those institutions, you might ask? Again, I'm going to have to say that as a topic that is far bigger than what I have time for, or even my own knowledge and expertise. This is only like my own little sliver of understanding. But I would say one big one is the increasing marriage that I feel I have been seeing between our Christian identities and our political identities. And in particular, over the last 40 years, which I believe is a perfect example of what God is trying to tell us in Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. Either you're going to hate one and love the other, or you're going to be devoted to one and despise the other. Yes, now, yes, that does continue on to talk about money, mammon, but I don't think, at the risk of cherry picking, I don't think I'm going too far astray by saying that money isn't the only master competing for your loyalty. Absolutely. That is the secular influence that I was referring to earlier. And I believe it poses a far greater threat to our church than anything entertainers like Lil Nas X or RuPaul have to say. Our news media, And our political parties, both Democrat and Republican, are selling us one particularly toxic product that's too many Christians are just eating up, and that is rage. They want us angry. That's that fuel. They're trying to fuel our fires.
Amen.
They want us mad.
Amen.
And they want us up in arms about very specific topics.
Yes.
So that we ain't paying attention, or at least we don't have as much energy left for other topics that are causing us so much more harm. They know if they get us angry, then they can focus that anger in ways that benefits them, all the while hurting us. They want us to rage on issues that maybe affect 1% of the population rather than issues that affect the 80%. It's a cheaper problem to deal with. If they can get us fired up about men who wear women's clothes in public, then maybe we don't demand reform of the criminal punishment system that puts a disproportionate number of poor Black and brown men behind bars, leaving us to wonder where's all the men at.
Yes, sir.
If they can get us fired up about who gets to use which bathroom, then maybe we won't be as focused on demanding reform of gun laws in this country that allowed almost 2,600 children and teens to be killed by firearms in 2021 alone, compared to the 0 people killed by trans people in bathrooms.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If they can get us all worked up on a former president's social media posts, then maybe we don't demand more support for schools that for many kids are the last lifeline they have to save them from a future of poverty, incarceration, and even an early death, because the Democratic Party ain't really helping schools as much as they say they are. I don't use these examples to comment on what your opinion should or should not be on them, but rather to hopefully show you that since we humans lack the omniscience and omnipotence of God, we kind of have to prioritize where the greatest harm is and how those priorities that we set, that we state, that we say, reflect our true values to the world as representatives of the church, as unfair as that is. Because the world's watching, your neighbors are watching, and everyone's watching. And the things we say, they'll notice those contradictions. When people say, hey, there's contradictions in the faith and in the Bible, I would say, well, from what you've seen, I can't really argue that there isn't from what they see from us. Because of the movie, a lot of people get the idea of God is dead being they get that message twisted. When Nietzsche said God is dead, he wasn't trying to make an argument for atheism. He was saying the same thing I've heard preachers say over and over again, that for how I see Christians actually act, he must be dead, because clearly you ain't worried about him.
Right.
When we prioritize the wrong issues, that's when the world calls us bigots. That's when the world calls us hypocrites, and why shouldn't they? Political parties for a secular government are full of leaders who are exactly those things. And so if we call ourselves Christians, yet devote our words and actions to the topics that are more aligned to our political values than our Christian values, then yeah, maybe that is why some people start falling away from the church, as they start to wonder if maybe there's other non-religious organizations that are trying to achieve the real progress needed in our society that at one point the church was doing before politics started affecting how we see ourselves. As the election season ramps up to full speed, and some would argue I'm a year late on that, but as the election season ramps up to full speed, the pull of our political identity on our religious identity is going to be at its peak. And don't think for a minute the enemy doesn't know this. What is it that I've heard our pastor preach on over and over and over again over the years? Ephesians 4:26. Be angry, but sin not. Our political identities put our mentality into a mode of winning and losing, winners and losers, labels. We are given ways to feel superior over those who are on the other side. But that leads directly to the kind of labeling that I've been discussing. Even if we do have the moral high ground in any given situation, we need to know that our actions can force us to yield that high ground to someone else if we mistake it for moral superiority. Romans 12:2 says, don't copy the customs of the world. Well, one great big giant American custom is presidential election season, where the two parties try to inflame our political identities to such a fever pitch, we can easily start to forget everything else about who we are. There's no greater amount of othering and us versus them labeling than during a presidential election year in America. And I would pray that we as Christians can take a step back as everybody else is leaning in. See that neither side truly reflects who we are as a Christian, and keep that in mind as we engage with the world. As beliefs and opinions flare up, in no other year throughout our yearly cycles, will more people need people like us Christians to say, I hear you, I feel your anger, and I get where it comes from. We are not so different as our leaders would like us to believe. By doing that, by showing the world that we can separate our Christian and political identities, maybe even shed our political identities altogether, we can show people that being a Christian isn't a contradiction of modern values any more now than it's ever been, no more or less. That the church can be the one place where people of all backgrounds, ethnicities, incomes, experiences can come together for the betterment of us all in a way that no other institution can, just as Jesus originally intended. Thank you, and have a blessed day.
That's why I was looking forward to hearing the rest of that. Amen. Well done. Wonderfully put together.